Warmth is often assumed to be a matter of climate, measured in degrees and humidity charts. Yet for many Americans arriving in Brazil, the first and most striking warmth has little to do with temperature. It is felt in the air between people, in the rhythm of conversations, in the way public spaces seem to invite connection rather than distance. The contrast appears immediately, quietly reshaping expectations formed elsewhere. Early moments tend to unfold with heightened sensory awareness. Streets feel animated rather than rushed, voices overlap without friction, and time appears to stretch in subtle ways. Americans commonly notice that interactions begin without the efficiency they are accustomed to. Greetings linger. Eye contact lasts longer. Smiles are offered freely, without clear transactional purpose. What initially reads as informality slowly reveals itself as a different social temperature, one that prioritizes presence over precision. This difference becomes more apparent through everyday routines. In places where Americans might expect speed and clarity, Brazil offers patience and improvisation. Conversations rarely move straight to the point. Personal questions surface early, not as intrusion but as a signal of interest. Silence is rarely used to end an exchange. Instead, dialogue tapers naturally, often accompanied by gestures or light physical proximity. For Americans, shaped by cultural norms of personal space and emotional restraint, this closeness can feel both comforting and disorienting. Underlying these impressions is a distinct relationship with time and social obligation. Efficiency exists, but it is rarely allowed to eclipse human connection. Plans remain flexible, schedules bend, and small delays are absorbed without visible stress. Americans often observe that social warmth here is not reserved for close relationships. It extends outward, touching casual encounters and brief interactions, creating an atmosphere where acknowledgement itself carries value. Public spaces reinforce this emotional climate. Cafes and sidewalks function as extensions of the living room rather than transitional zones. Laughter carries easily, music spills into the background, and daily life feels designed to be shared rather than navigated alone. For Americans accustomed to clearly defined private and public boundaries, this openness introduces a subtle psychological shift. Guarded habits begin to loosen, even if only temporarily. As days pass, the initial surprise gives way to a deeper recognition. The warmth experienced is not performative or exaggerated. It is structural, embedded in social expectations, and reinforced through repetition. Americans begin to sense that emotional availability is not seen as vulnerability here, but as social competence. This realization quietly reframes earlier assumptions, setting the stage for a more profound cultural adjustment still unfolding. This adjustment often manifests in small but telling moments. Americans notice how strangers offer advice without hesitation, how conversations drift into personal territory without formal permission. Compliments are direct, delivered without irony, and physical gestures and arm touch, a closer stance, carry no implied urgency. What might be read elsewhere as over-familiarity functions here as social glue, reinforcing a sense of shared presence. Emotional expression follows similar patterns. Joy, frustration, affection, and concern are allowed visible space. Reactions are rarely muted for the sake of composure. Americans frequently observe that emotions are treated as communal signals rather than private states to be managed quietly. This openness creates a feedback loop. Expression invites response, response deepens connection, and connection reinforces warmth. Over time, the emotional environment feels less guarded, more breathable. Workplace dynamics reflect this cultural temperature as well. Professional interactions often begin with extended small talk, not as a delay but as a foundation. Trust is established through familiarity before productivity is expected to peak. Americans accustomed to separating personal identity from professional roles may initially struggle to interpret this rhythm. Yet many come to recognize that efficiency here is relational rather than procedural, built on comfort and mutual recognition. The concept of formality itself carries different weight. Titles and rigid hierarchies exist, but they soften quickly once interaction begins. Humor crosses status lines, and warmth is not withheld as a reward for closeness. It is offered upfront. Americans often note how this reverses familiar social calculations. Instead of earning friendliness through time or achievement, warmth appears as a default setting, shaping interactions from the first exchange. These patterns extend into moments of difficulty. When problems arise, responses are rarely detached. Concern is expressed openly, support offered verbally and physically. Americans may observe that discomfort is shared rather than isolated, diffused through conversation rather than managed alone. This collective handling of emotional strain reinforces the sense that social bonds are meant to absorb life's fluctuations. Gradually, this environment begins to influence behavior. Americans find themselves lingering longer in conversations, accepting interruptions without irritation, responding emotionally where they might once have remained neutral. The cultural warmth does not demand transformation, but it quietly invites recalibration. Expectations soften, internal pacing shifts, and interactions begin to feel less like transactions and more like moments of shared existence, signaling a deeper change taking shape beneath the surface, as this recalibration settles in. Americans often recognize that the warmth experienced is sustained by an underlying social philosophy. Connection is not treated as an optional layer added to life, but as its organizing principle. Daily interactions are expected to carry emotional acknowledgement, even when brief or circumstantial. This expectation subtly reshapes how attention is distributed, making presence itself a form of respect. Over time, the contrast with American norms becomes clearer. In the United States, warmth is frequently contextual, activated within established relationships or specific social settings. In Brazil, it operates as ambient energy, surrounding interactions regardless of depth or duration. Americans observe that this does not eliminate boundaries, but it reframes them. Distance exists, yet it is expressed gently, without emotional withdrawal. Disagreement can coexist with friendliness, and familiarity does not automatically signal obligation. This environment influences internal states as much as outward behavior. Many Americans find that constant emotional vigilance begins to fade. There is less need to calculate tone, to protect neutrality, or to maintain distance as a default. Social friction feels reduced, not because life is simpler, but because emotional exchange is normalized rather than negotiated. The result is a sense of psychological warmth that mirrors the social one. The culture's relationship with joy further reinforces this feeling. Celebration is woven into ordinary days, not isolated as a special event. Music, humor, and shared food function as emotional anchors, grounding people in collective experience. Americans often note that happiness here is less about achievement and more about participation. Being present carries its own legitimacy, independent of outcome or productivity. In this context, warmth becomes cumulative. Each small interaction contributes to an atmosphere that feels consistently human, less filtered by efficiency or self-protection. Americans may realize that what initially felt surprising was not exaggerated friendliness, but a different calibration of emotional openness. The culture does not rush intimacy, yet it does not postpone it either. By the time departure approaches, the impression left behind is rarely about specific moments. It is about tone. Brazil feels warm because it allows emotional exchange to exist without justification. In doing so, it highlights how cultural systems quietly shape what feels normal, acceptable, or even possible. The warmth lingers not as a memory of place, but as a reminder that social climates, like physical ones, are designed and they can always be designed differently.